And as Republicans position more election deniers for office, CNN has learned the former president's attorneys have warned him his effort to overturn the 2020 election could bring indictments. Former Attorney General Eric Holder believes it will happen and will probably include Trump.
My guess is that by the end of this process, you're going to see indictments involving high-level people in the White House. You're going to see indictments against people outside the White House who were advising them with regard to the attempt to steal the election. And I think ultimately you're probably going to see the former president of the United States indicted as well.
Well, that prediction comes as CNN has learned that for the first time, Trump's legal team is in direct talks with the Department of Justice about executive privilege. More signs investigators are focusing on Trump's actions on January 6th and the lead up to it.
With me to share their reporting and their insights, CNN's Manu Raju, Jackie Kucinich of the Daily Beast, Laura Barone-Lopez of the PBS NewsHour, and CNN legal analyst Carrie Cordero. Let me start with you, Counselor. If the former president's lawyers are in direct communication with senior attorneys at the Justice Department, that tells you what?
It tells me that they are looking for information. By going in and engaging in a dialogue with the Justice Department, they're there, I think, in part to be able to, by asking questions, find out as much as they possibly can about the scope of the investigation, about whether former Chief of Staff Mark Meadows is going to be charged, about how close the investigation is coming to the former president. So while they can engage in conversation about executive privilege and attorney-client privilege as it relates to the former president, I think the most they have to gain through these meetings is what they can glean from them.
It's a fascinating moment, the timing, because we know, and we can put up on the screen, we know the federal grand jury looking into this, the fake electors plot. Should we seize voting machines? It's not just about the violence at the Capitol on January 6th. It includes a who's who of the Trump administration and the president's outside circle, people who fought the plan and people who were involved in the plan. Two top aides to Mike Pence, the White House counsel and his deputy in the middle of your screen there. To the right of your screen, people who are trying to help Trump, both inside the Justice Department and his attorney, John Eastman. You look at that group. If you were Donald Trump's lawyers, to Carrie's point, you'd want to know, what are they saying?
Well, right, and that's one of the reasons they're trying to determine what is what falls under executive privilege. But I think, one of the things in the report that really got me was the fact that Trump still has skepticism that he's going to be indicted. He's not convinced, and there isn't any indication, one way or the other. But I think that speaks to how he really hasn't been held accountable for many things in his life, both inside and outside of office. So why should this be any different? It seems to be kind of where his head is.
And this statement from a spokesman for the former president, the spokesman would not put a name on the statement, which to me is odd. I'll just leave it at that. But how can any future president ever have private conversations with his attorneys, counsels, and other senior advisors if any such advisor is forced, either during or after the presidency, in front of they take a shot at the select committee. It's a select committee up in Congress, thank you very much, or other entity and forced to reveal those privileged confidential discussions. It's a political statement as much as a legal statement. They go attacking the Congress there.
Yeah, and it's also because ultimately what the DOJ is trying to determine is whether or not the president committed any crimes, whether it was defrauding the U.S. and the electoral system, whether it was obstructing a congressional proceeding. And so ultimately, yes, the president has executive privilege and can have private conversations with his lawyers. But if a law was broken, then that's a different story.
The conversation about this is so different than it was a couple of weeks ago, where we didn't know as much about what the grand jury was doing. Number one, we didn't know that Mike Pence's attorney and his chief of staff had been in. We didn't know that they were trying to get Pat Cipollone and his deputy, Mr. Philbin, into the grand jury. So now people are saying, wow, okay, the Justice Department is actually doing some serious business. Among those saying, wow, is Liz Cheney, of course, the top Republican on the committee in Congress. There have been some criticism on Capitol Hill saying, why isn't the Justice Department doing more? Now she says, maybe I should trust this.
We're going to continue to follow the facts. I think the Department of Justice will do that, but they have to make decisions about prosecution, understanding what it means if the facts and the evidence are there and they decide not to prosecute. How do we then call ourselves a nation of laws?
The last part there in that interview with our Casey Hunt is trying to essentially, tell the Justice Department, man up, be brave. Don't back off at the last second because he's a former president.
Yeah, and what's been interesting too here is the Justice Department has been more public about what's happening. Well, of course, we don't know everything that's going on, and they won't confirm the nature of the investigation. Merrick Garland, giving that interview just a couple weeks ago, talking about how no one is above the law, so signaling that things are moving here at a different pace than a lot of people had expected. And the players who have testified before the grand jury are also significant. Some of those folks, including the people who are close to the former vice president, Mike Pence, testified, of course, in the select committee, showing Donald Trump's concerted effort to overturn the election. How much of that is a focus of the investigation, too, is a question here. And also, the committee, too, is indicating as well, is providing this information to the Justice Department. So whether they're pursuing similar lines here, Donald Trump's role, it appears that they might be.
Is there a clear line on this privilege question, and does it impact privilege issues at all if you bring it to a judge that many of these same people did testify to the January 6th committee? Is that complicated, clean it up?
I think the privilege issues, first of all, the executive privilege really belongs to the current president. There's arguments that a former president can assert it, but President Biden has really made clear that as to January 6th matters, he is not claiming executive privilege, and he's the sitting executive. The second thing is that crimes, as Laura just said earlier, crimes are not allowed to be overcome by the executive privilege. So if there is evidence of a crime, then that is going to trump claims of executive privilege or attorney-client privilege.
Well played, pun intended. Thank you very much.